The states definitely need the right to nullify something that the federal government pushes down on them whenever it becomes or whenever it is unconstitutional. The health care bill being a very prime example. We need to nullify that. The states should nullify that because it is completely unconstitutional. The 10th Amendment is the key here. The 10th Amendment should be brought back to the surface here, should be brought back to the forefront, and the states must stand on that and say to the federal government, by Article 1, Section 8, you have no authority to do this, and because you do not have the authority to do that in Article 1, Section 8, we are imposing the power of the 10th Amendment, and we are taking this away from you, and we're not going to play. Thank you.
Be thankful that you live in Oklahoma. Believe it or not, Oklahoma, and I'm sure most of you are aware if you're very active, kind of leads other states at times with making sure that that 10th Amendment is adhered to. We have a thing called the 10th with teeth. I think Mike Ritz, Gary, is that the gentleman? Is it Mike Ritz that authored that in Tulsa? The governor has, I think, they haven't brought it into committee or time. They're having problems getting that through. The governor has been on a veto binge lately on items that have passed both Senate and House that are very conducive to pushing that 10th Amendment forward out there and saying, enough, federal government. We, the states, have a right. And again, I'm going to have to mention Randy Brogdon's name one more time. He is a huge 10th Amendment supporter, as I am. And he wants to pull Oklahoma away from that nanny state, that central planning system. He knows that government works from you and me up, not from the top down. We need someone in Washington to help the governor that's trying to pull that state away. I want to push it because the states have the rights under the 10th Amendment. And it's not just the states, but if it doesn't belong to in the 18 enumerated powers that Congress has, it also goes to the individual, the state and the individual. Thank you.
There is a bill in Congress, H.R. 450, Enumerated Powers Act, and I know it's co-sponsored by Senator Coburn. Again, this is the government only has those certain 18 enumerated powers. Everything else goes to the state or to the individual. In Oklahoma, like you said, we've got teeth when it comes time to getting legislation passed, but we're having a lot of problems with Governor Henry and also with our AG Edmondson. And I do also want to say I know Randy Brogdon, when he gets in there, it's going to make a big difference. But right now, Henry is vetoing everything that is passed the House and the Senate. And just have to remember, we need to get rid of him and get Randy Brogdon in there. And as far as for representatives, you got to get me and people like me into Congress and really start shaking things up. If we can this election get 2/3, get 2/3 conservatives in there, and by Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2 of the Constitution, with 2/3 we can vote out a member. But we need 2/3, so let's please do it. Do it this year. Thanks.
We received one question from the audience on a topic that we had not covered, after which we will allow each of you to ask a question of the other candidates. This one will go to Charles. How do you feel about term limits?
As long as we have 60% or more of the general population that is not engaged in governing themselves, and when I say that, I mean not engaged in the political process, then we must have term limits. When we reach the point where we have 80-90% of the people who are involved in the process of government, then we won't need term limits, because that many people will be able to put term limits on those people who are there. So for right now, I agree, I think we need term limits. But they cannot be self-imposed term limits, because if you send a good representative to Washington, D.C., and they limit themselves in 6 years or 8 years, whatever it is, the bad guys are still going to be there. Then the state of Oklahoma, District 2, is weakened. So term limits, we need them, but they've got to be across the board. As long as I'm in Washington, D.C., I will do what the people want me to do.
I will support and co-sponsor and do whatever it takes for term limits. I understand there are unintended consequences to every action, especially an action at the federal level. And I will guarantee you, everyone that supports term limits, and every one of you may not, but sometime, at some place down the road, it's going to come back and we're going to say, gosh, if we just didn't have term limits. But I believe the benefits far outweigh the repercussions of what may be induced by term limits. We have to have legislatively enforced term limits. I personally will term limit myself. I do not want to marry those two terms, career and politician, together. That is the last thing that I want to be or be known as. But we must ensure term limits. I am for that 100% and will fight and support that. Thank you.
I, too, am for term limits. I believe our founding fathers never intended representatives to go to Washington and make a career out of it. It's a part-time job. They go there, they do their job, and then go back home to their regular jobs. If I should say when I make it to Congress, I am going to support or co-sponsor legislation to limit term limits to 3 terms for U.S. congressmen and 2 6-year terms for senators. The president only gets 2 terms, so why should it be unlimited for the others? So I'm all for term limits. Thank you.
Term limits can be a very controversial issue. We need to be about solutions, not putting Band-Aids on gaping wounds. Term limits abolish your right as a citizen, and it abolishes the power of your vote. You should have the choice to decide who you want to represent you, and you should have the choice with your vote to determine whether or not a representative has your approval or not because of the job they are doing. Am I strictly opposed to term limits? No. If it is truly what the people really want and believe it is our only solution, then I can support it. But more importantly, what is the problem? It is corruption and greed. Those will not be solved with term limits. We must vet out those running for office, hold them accountable, and truly put in people that will represent our conservative principles and that they themselves also have conservative and Christian values.
Howard, do you have a question for one or all of the other candidates?
Knowing what each one of you know right now, what will be your biggest impediment to beating Dan Boren?